What are the best action movies of all time? It's a controversial question, isn't it? Anytime any publication or website or channel puts out a new list of what they consider the greatest action movies of all time are, it can't help but generate a ton of controversy. Nevertheless, we here at JoBlo decided to throw our hats into the ring with a list that we really hope generates some nostalgia among our viewers, but also encourages them to seek out the movies on this list that, hey, they might not have seen. But first, a note. Some may wonder where superhero movies are on the list. Given how broad that genre is, we decided to stick to old school action, so we've left them completely off the list as kinda they deserve their own ranking. There are also a few absences that you might note, notably some Jackie Chan films, but don't worry, those are going to follow in another list that we have planned, so stay tuned. With that out of the way though, here is our choice for the top 25 best action movies ever made. Some of these are going to be controversial, so sit back, relax, and hopefully enjoy. Number 25 is Hard Target. Starting with the controversial one right away. It has to be noted, in the history of action films, Jean-Claude Van Damme, whatever the position he might be in now, was one of the biggest of all time, especially in the 1990s. And to me, Hard Target is his masterpiece. It's beautifully directed by John Woo in his American film debut, and not only is it gloriously violent and lovingly photographed, but it also has one of the most memorable villains of all time, Lance Henriksen's Emile Fouchon. It's John Woo's take on the classic Most Dangerous Game formula, which has been done over and over and over again, but rarely with as much style as it's done here. But what's interesting about it is it gives equal screen time to its heroes and villains, which makes it highly unique as an action film. One note, to fully appreciate Hard Target, you really have to see the uncensored, unrated version, which Kino reissued quite recently on Blu-ray. It is fantastic. Number 24, Luc Besson's Léon the Professional. The 1994 hitman drama ranks as one of the most stylish action movies ever made. Sporting a lush score by Eric Serra and an iconic performance by Jean Reno as the titular cleaner, this one inspired many knockoffs. It also introduced the world to Natalie Portman, who plays Léon's pseudo-daughter-esque figure, who he helps avenge her family's murder. Plus, Gary Oldman is one of the greatest villains of all time as cinema's most iconically evil, corrupt cop.
Bring me everyone. What do you mean everyone?
Number 23, Casino Royale. You can't seriously do a list like this without including at least one James Bond movie. I think I probably prefer James Bond films like On Her Majesty's Secret Service on the whole, but in terms of action, I think Martin Campbell probably made the best overall action flick of the franchise with Casino Royale. One could argue this completely reinvented the character for the 21st century with an excellent showcase for Daniel Craig's physical prowess. Number 22, Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger became a star in Conan the Barbarian and the Terminator, but it was Commando that changed his image from a killing machine to a more personable, loving variation. Sherry still sends 137 souls to meet their maker, and that's exact, by the way. He really does kill 137 people in this movie. But he also establishes a loose persona as a loving father that really changed the way people saw him. He could be funny, he could be relaxed, he could be loving. Plus, Commando also has some of the most creative carnage of all time packed into the insane climax. And that score by James Horner is terrific. Number 21. A movie very similar to Commando, but came out a few months earlier and was an even bigger hit, Rambo: First Blood Part 2. Now, the Vietnam War was a psychic wound on America in this era, and I'm not sure contemporary audiences are really aware of the cultural importance of Rambo 2 in the United States throughout the decade. Along with Commando, this is one of the first one-man army movies, and it was endlessly imitated, especially in Italy. It was also the second highest-grossing movie of 1985 and boosted Stallone into the stratosphere. It was name-checked by the sitting president, Ronald Reagan, and in some ways, it paved the way for more serious examinations of the Vietnam War, such as Platoon. It's also worth noting that the MIA issue was widely debated at the time, so of all the films on this list, I could argue that this might be one of the most culturally significant. Speaking of cultural significance, though, 1986's Top Gun, which is our 20th greatest action movie of all time, is probably one of the most iconic films ever made. Tom Cruise's Maverick is one of the great bad boys of cinema, and rumor has it enlistment into the US Navy skyrocketed after this Tony Scott-directed masterpiece, in which Cruise stars the famously cocky pilot Maverick. From a stylistic standpoint, this might actually be perhaps the most influential film on the list. The only reason it's this far down is that the action is mostly contained to aerial dogfights, and you could even make a good case for the sequel, Top Gun Maverick, as being one of the best action movies ever. Number 19, Roadhouse. Now, some may chuckle at Roadhouse's inclusion on this list, but there are several important reasons why it belongs here. For one, it upends the era's idea of an action hero.
Yeah, and I thought you'd be bigger.
Many of the biggest stars of the time were monosyllabic types, but Patrick Swayze was different. His character Dalton is smart, stylish, and cerebral, with a degree in philosophy and a low-key vibe that invites people to underestimate him, to their doom. But the main reason Roadhouse makes this list is the fact that the fights in this movie, they feel real, with them the perfect antidote to the overly choreographed bouts that followed in its wake. In this one, people whack each other with tree chunks, and by the time it's over, Swayze's Dalton can barely stand. It's really kind of a masterpiece of its kind. Number 18, Beverly Hills Cop. Being an action hero is not all about brawn. Attitude has a lot to do with it, and there's arguably never been a hero with more attitude than Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley. He's not a muscle man, but he's young and street smart, and what's great about this movie is how director Martin Brest allows the film to be both hilarious, but then when the action starts, it gets serious, especially towards the end. I also always really like the fact that Axel becomes pals with the Beverly Hills Cops in the film that initially antagonize him, with him teaming up with Judge Reinhold's character and John Ashton's character at the end to take on the villains. And this carries over into the sequels. Number 17, the John Wick franchise. Granted, we're cheating a little bit with this one, but it's pretty amazing how what started off as a movie that nearly went direct-to-video became one of the biggest action franchises of the century. At the time this was made, Keanu Reeves was on the verge of becoming a direct-to-video star, but this reinvented him for a new generation and gave him one of his most iconic characters to play, with him becoming perhaps the most famous movie hitman since Chow Yun-fat ditched his guns. Chad Stahelski's take on action choreography has been tremendously influential, with almost every action flick that comes out nowadays owing the franchise a sizable debt. Number 16, Kill Bill. Quentin Tarantino's made some incredible films, but in terms of action, none was more influential than his ode to kung fu cinema, Kill Bill. The first volume alone has some of the most stylish and memorable action sequences of the last quarter century, including the iconic showdown at the House of Blue Leaves. Each volume is half of a bigger whole, but in terms of action, performance, direction, and music, I think a case for Kill Bill being one of the greatest action movies of all time isn't tough to make. Number 15 is a newer film, Mad Max Fury Road. Not every movie is a walk in the park, and it figures that sometimes to get amazing results on that big screen, you need a little behind-the-scenes chaos. And indeed, Fury Road was notoriously a madhouse of a shoot, with the two stars, Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy, famously feuding. In the making of book, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, both look back at the difficulty of making the film with some regret, with it seeming like no one knew exactly how much of a classic it would become, with Hardy especially noting how in over his head he was. No matter, the result on the screen is arguably worth it. George Miller took decades to finally get a new Mad Max movie underway, and the result is what's widely considered one of the greatest films of its kind ever made. Number 14, Point Break. In 1991, Point Break was likely just considered another quite solid action movie, but like another movie on this list starring Patrick Swayze, Roadhouse, its legacy grew over time, with it being one of the most quoted and rewatchable movies ever made.
I am an FBI agent!
It helped make Keanu Reeves an action star, and it's one of the best directed studio films of the 90s, with Catherine Bigelow's movie being ripped off over and over again in the years to follow, most notably by the Fast and the Furious. Yes, there, we said it. By the way, Vin Diesel ain't got nothing on Crazy Swayze. Number 13. Fact, there has never been a more macho movie made than Predator. Think about it. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger, the late Carl Weathers, Jesse the Body Ventura, Bill Duke, Crazy Sonny Landham, and the Predator. Even before the alien shows up, this would be up there with some of the greatest men on a mission movies ever made. But when suddenly we see the team getting picked off one by one and Arnold has to go mano a mano, stripped down with his otherworldly foe, you know you're watching a classic. Also, Predator pulls off a really neat trick. It makes Schwarzenegger an underdog. This will not be the last John McTiernan movie on this list. Number 12, First Blood. While Rambo 2 is maybe more impressive from a purely carnage-packed standpoint, First Blood is devastating and arguably Sylvester Stallone's best ever movie after the original Rocky. John Rambo is a tragic figure here, and the action, while lower key than the next couple movies, will blow you away, such as amazing cliff dive. Plus, there's an incredible score by Jerry Goldsmith, and Stallone's acting in the film and the shattering climax is really quite something. Number 11, The Matrix. The only bad thing about the Wachowskis' The Matrix is that it was so good a whole slew of movies tried to copy it, only for no one to quite do it as well. Heck, even the Wachowskis themselves were never quite able to nail a follow-up. Well, none of the sequels particularly good, even if they do have their fans. We still think that the first one is one of the best sci-fi action movies of all time though, Keanu Reeves reinventing himself as Neo, one of the millennium's defining heroes. Number 10 is The Raid. Audiences who saw Gareth Evans' The Raid at the initial TIFF Midnight Madness screening probably walked out of this one feeling like they'd just been hit by a freight train. The martial arts action movie was kind of reinvented by this film and its equally impressive sequel, with Iko Uwais showing off moves like we'd never really seen on the big screen before. It's quite something. Number 9, Lethal Weapon. While it's not the first buddy cop movie, this is the one that really made it a genre unto itself. Mel Gibson and Danny Glover are perfectly cast as the iconic pals Riggs and Murtaugh, with Richard Donner's lean and mean direction giving the movie a pulse that the admittedly awesome follow-ups don't quite match. Mel Gibson's Riggs in particular was one of the most unpredictable action heroes that we have on this list, particularly in the first film. He really does feel dangerous. But more than anything, Lethal Weapon is kind of a love story between these two buddy cops, right? Number 8, RoboCop. Paul Verhoeven's hyperkinetic, ultra-violent future cop movie will never be equaled, in my opinion. Peter Weller is iconic as the tragic Alex Murphy turned RoboCop, and it's one of the few movies on this list that no one could ever really accuse of being dated. Everything about it is kind of cutting edge, from the novel use of miniatures to social commentary to the great score by Basil Poledouris. The only thing that's ironic about RoboCop is that it was a big studio movie in the 80s. I feel like if you put it out now with all the satire, it would almost be an art house film. Number 7, Aliens. This one is unique in that it's an action movie sequel to a pretty tight horror flick. Everyone has their own opinion about whether or not James Cameron's space actioner matches up with Ridley Scott's original, but it remains one of the best sci-fi actioners ever made, with Sigourney Weaver our choice for the greatest action heroine of all time. Number 6 is The Road Warrior. Some will say that George Miller's Fury Road is better, but for my money, nothing quite matches the intensity of The Road Warrior, which was shot without the benefit of CGI and other bells and whistles. The vehicular carnage is amazing, and Mel Gibson, like it or not, is the definitive Mad Max. Number 5, Enter the Dragon. Very few movies on this list are as influential as the final film made by the great Bruce Lee, with this being the movie that likely would have broken him through to the North American audience. Granted, him dying does add to the mystique somewhat, but boy, is this ever one of the best martial arts action movies ever made or what. Without Enter the Dragon, I doubt American martial arts film stars like JCVD or Steven Seagal, the guys that were popular in North America during the 80s and 90s, would have really caught on the way they did. Number 4 is Hard Boiled. John Woo was at the peak of his filmmaking abilities when he made this buddy cop action flick pairing Chow Yun-fat's rebellious cop Tequila with an undercover operative played by Tony Leung. The last 40 minutes of this film have never been equaled by a shootout standpoint, which is why it nudged The Killer off this list. Both of them are pretty amazing though. Number 3, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven Spielberg's Ode to Adventure is the most iconic film of its kind, introducing us to the great Indiana Jones, as played by Harrison Ford. What else can really be said about this adventure masterpiece that hasn't been said already? It is a perfect film. Number 2 is the greatest sequel of all time, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It's really kind of the last of its kind in some ways, being a huge budget action flick done in the old ways, with real explosions and real heart, with Schwarzenegger giving perhaps his most affecting performance as the cyborg who slowly learns the bittersweet truth about being human. Plus, Linda Hamilton is badass in this film. And finally, number 1, what else could it be but Die Hard? Bruce Willis's John McClane is the definitive action star, with him being a regular guy who's forced into action and really just wants to get home to his family for Christmas. Willis, Alan Rickman, the score, everything about this movie is iconic, but what makes it so great is the fact that John McTiernan and Bruce Willis don't make John McClane a superhero. He's rather just a man. And if you ask anybody what the greatest scene in Die Hard is it one of the great action scenes, or is it the scene where McClane, with his feet all bloody and he's pulling glass out, is on the walkie-talkie telling Reginald VelJohnson's character that he doesn't think he's going to make it through the night and that he loves his wife? That's what makes John McClane a real hero. he's human. So there you have it. That's our list of what we consider the 25 greatest action movies of all time, but I'm sure that you all have your own opinions, so make sure to let us know in the comments. And hey, if you like this video, maybe we'll do 25 more.